Hi, Dr. P here. I think I've made the point by now that war is a combination of maneuver and combat at most levels. And the question here is, do you want either to dominate, and which do you want to dominate? What do we need for maneuver? This is true in games and in life. It requires multiple locations. It requires a relationship between those locations. It requires the ability of at least the offensive assets to change locations. Maneuver is very important in generalship. Here are some quotes, some I've used before. The first one, I can always make it a rule to get there first with the most men, Nathan Bedford Forrest. Often misquoted as get thar firstest with the mostest. Strategy is the art of making use of time and space, Napoleon. Rapidity is the essence of war, Sun Tzu. Maneuver is an essential of generalship, and remember, war games are pretty much about generalship. The best generals use maneuver as a substitute for slaughter, for combat. To subdue the enemy without fighting is a supreme excellence. You have to do that through maneuver. Battles are won by slaughter and maneuver. The better generals use maneuver. What's required for combat? Well, you need multiple locations and geospatial relationships, or you're not going to have your combat amount to much. Although you can arrange combat without multiple locations. Combat often features action at a distance in modern games because you have artillery, and artillery is queen of battle. Or you have air forces, and they have even longer ranges. But if you go back further, where there is no artillery or the equivalent, then it's a great mass of men in a relatively small area. So what you need to depict combat is also what you need to depict maneuver. You can choose what details you want to put into the combat, whatever suits the game, whatever suits your purpose. How does it work in some well-known games? Risk. There's not much maneuver. The combat is particularly unrealistic because the mass rarely matters in the combat. It's not very satisfactory really on either count, but it is simple. Civilization was dominated by maneuver. Combat until recently was simplistic, that is to say, too simple, because just the top unit of a stack fought each other, and again, mass didn't matter. Axis and Allies, which has both tabletop and video versions, it's more complex, but generally combat dominant, especially because the defender cannot retreat. Now, if you think about what attracts people in mass markets and broad markets, dice fests work out very well, and Axis and Allies is very much a dice fest. Now, most real-time strategy games, which of course are video games, maneuver is very important, but firepower is also very important. There's kind of a balance there. But when you get to the point where you have rushes, you get together a huge gang and just send them in the direction of the enemy, then firepower is considerably more important. And I'll throw my own Britannia in here. It has simple combat. Location is important. I wouldn't say maneuver is quite so important, but you have to be in the right places. And in general, that's more important than the combat. How about Stratego, or the original game La Attaque? Well, it's very much a tactical game. Deterministic, but there's very little room for maneuver, and the combat also is very simple, and this is one reason why it succeeded as a mass market game. There were not very many decisions to make. There was uncertainty in the units, but not uncertainty in the combat. It's very clean. Then the last one I'll take is Empire Deluxe, which is a classic video game. I've recently been playing the enhanced version of Empire Deluxe, which still dates from about 2004. The units fight 1-to-1, but units can be weakened by successive victories. So if you have two cruisers against a battleship, frequently the battleship will kill one cruiser and the second cruiser will kill the battleship. The cruisers are quite powerful. Maneuver is a way to get an advantage in combat because you can use artillery, including seaborne artillery, to pick off vast numbers of the enemy without danger to yourself. So, in a sense, the maneuver is much more important than the combat, although there's a great deal of combat. Now, if I'm going to have one dominate the other, I'm going to have maneuver dominate combat because excellent generalship depends on maneuver. Also, I have to say, I'm not the sort who just likes to have great masses clump into each other like World War I. I like something much more open and using finesse. Also, I tend to like strategic games, and the higher up the strategic scale you go, the more that details of combat have no place. Combat should be simple, because there are other things the players should be thinking about. And I can throw in here my usual motto about designing simplicity. In fact, it's hard to design a combat-dominant strategic game, and I suggest Axis and Allies may be one of the few that has succeeded in that regard. Now, tactical games are much more likely to be combat-dominant. The people who play the tactical games are interested in combat. They're interested in weapons. They're interested in armor penetration, things like that. Maneuver is relatively unimportant, although certainly taking cover is very important, but it's elementary. In the end, you have to decide what you want to emphasize or what you do not want to emphasize. Now, I'm going to talk about combat methods and about maneuver methods in later screencasts.